Economics and the Principles of Liberalism. In what ways did economies in the first half of the 1900s reflect the principles of liberalism? Theodore Roosevelt was President of the United States from 1901 to 1909 and wanted to give middle-class Americans a square deal. A progressive leader, Roosevelt implemented the Elkins Act in 1903 and the Hepburn Act in 1906 to stop railroads from offering preferential treatment to big-time customers. He introduced the Meat Inspection Act and the Food and Drug Act in 1906 to address food safety concerns. William Howard Taft, president from 1909 to 1913, pursued the progressive ideas started by Roosevelt. He worked to break up monopolies exerted by business conglomerates, with the Sherman Antitrust Act introduced in 1890, which prevented collusion of competing companies in an industry. Taft made sure in the pursuit of competition and self-interest, liberal principles, that a business entity couldn't own two or more competing businesses. He forced the Standard Oil Company to break up into 34 smaller independent companies in 1911. In the 1920s, the US economy was booming. It was a country focused on economic prosperity. Consumerism was at an all-time high. People were buying cars, houses, and goods. Demand was high and supply was high. Warren Harding was elected president in 1921 and enforced a retreat from political involvement in other countries, a cutback of immigration, and a reduction of government involvement in the economy. Harding reduced immigration and income tax, and when he was replaced by Calvin Coolidge in 1924, he also favored the liberal principles of Harding and continued to lower taxes and immigrations. At the all-time high of the Roaring Twenties, people were purchasing stocks which were rising on credit. People were purchasing houses and vehicles on credit as well, believing there would never be another recession. On October 29, 1929, the price of stocks stopped rising due to the crash of the price of grain as France started to produce grain again, and people rushed to sell their stocks. The market crashed, banks began to call in loans, people rushed to withdraw savings from banks, causing banks to go bankrupt. Unemployment increased, businesses failed, international trade slowed, and many went bankrupt. This was the Great Depression. As the Depression of the 1930s deepened, people began to question capitalist classical liberal practices. Many supported collectivist policies. In Canada, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation was started with public ownership of industries and financial institutions. Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected in 1933 and offered a New Deal to Americans. This marked the swing of the economic pendulum back to government intervention from where it was at classical liberalism in the US. Roosevelt's New Deals provided jobs and relief for those out of work. The banking system was stabilized, unions were encouraged, farm prices were raised via reduced crop and livestock output, and people were paid to write, paint, sculpt, and get involved in the arts. People now believed in the place of the government in the economy. Classical liberalism had been put out of sight for the time being. In Canada, William Mackenzie King involved the government much more as well. Unemployed workers were given work and relief camps, the CBC was created, unemployment insurance was enacted, and public low-cost housing was created for Canadians. The economies that had embraced and thrived on the principles of classical liberalism implemented by Taft and Coolidge in the 1920s had come to welcome the interventionist policies of collectivism due to the hardships suffered under the Great Depression, which many blamed on the capitalist liberal system.